I'd like to make the case against Holocaust inversion that it's counterproductive. I think my issue is, I would say, threefold. One, sure, you can draw parallels between any two events that are causing people to needlessly be harmed. But if you actually seriously compare them, whether it's the sheer numbers of casualties, whether it's the means in which people are being harmed, or whether it's the intention behind the harming, I think that it's just it's not an accurate comparison. But I think more importantly, put the accuracy aside, it's the kind of comparison that is so inflammatory to Jewish people and to Israelis that when they hear it, they're no longer open to listening to what you have to say. So it seems like it's a form of rhetoric that turns away people, and perhaps the people who most need to hear your message are refusing to listen. And thirdly, it almost makes the person speaking the center, the topic of conversation. So much of the attacks against you throughout the years have been the words you said, not the policies you propose, but your inflammatory rhetoric. It's almost like doing this gives people endless fodder to attack you rather than actual listen to your message about Palestinians. So I think we very well can talk about how horrific the situation in Gaza is. We could talk about the brutality of our military presence in the West Bank, and we could do all this and give a realistic description of the situation and do it in a way that Israelis and Jews are going to hear what we have to say. And I really think this channel is testament of that. Our audience goes all the way from anti-Zionists who want to see the destruction of Israel and Kahanists who want to expel Palestinians and everything in between. And they're able to hear because the message is in a way that they're open to hearing us. So I'm under the impression that Holocaust inversion, not only is not accurate, but it's the least effective way to reach Jews and Israelis.
Well, there are a number of things to say to that. In general, I agree with you. At this point, I agree with you. I agree with that. And I'm not going to quarrel where there's no need to quarrel. I guess
Okay.
the biggest difference with you is, you see, and I don't even know, are you Israeli?
Yeah, I'm Israeli American. I
Yeah.
spent half my life.
Okay.
Hmm.
I don't see any purpose in talking to Israelis right now. Just as I didn't think there was any purpose to talking to whites in the American South during the early years of the civil rights movement. They were very vicious. I remember one person saying that was mean country. Mean. If you were a white person who showed solidarity with the blacks, you were immediately a pariah and ostracized in the American South. Same thing in South Africa. The South African whites were dug in. You didn't waste time talking to the white people. You might as well talk to a wall. You can't talk to Israelis now. There's no Israel is one of those unique places in the world today. Israel does not have a left. It does not have a center. It has a right, a further right, and an ultra right. That's the whole spectrum in Israel. The rest to the left of the right, namely what we would call a center or an authentic left, you could fit them in my apartment the way I see it, and people can agree or disagree. First of all, at a certain point, the Nazi Holocaust became a touchstone of evil. So the only way you can make an argument, you were able to make an argument about something being evil, was this in some way related to the Holocaust. Otherwise, it wasn't evil. The Holocaust became the standard by which you judge evil or not. So, since everything else was being compared to the Holocaust, it didn't seem a stretch to also, in order to arouse people's indignation at what was happening to also bring in the experience of the Palestinians. So at the time, it seemed to be the only way in which the feelings of Jews would be rattled by what Israel was doing. Secondly, you have to remember that the Nazi Holocaust, not in general, but in particular for Jews, was the standard.
So you, in your explanation of the situation in Gaza, you you described how horrific the situation is there, and you were able to do it. You did use a few Holocaust comparisons, but even if you were to remove those Holocaust comparisons, your depiction of Gaza still would have been more accurate, just as bad, and more palatable for Israelis to hear you. So it seems, by and large, if we want to reach people, it's not about having the right to compare it to the Holocaust. It's not about being able to draw parallels. Ultimately, it's not going to convince Jews because let's look at numbers. The Palestinian population has quadrupled since 48. Israelis don't have an intention to exterminate Palestinians. These two things alone, again, I'm not minimizing in any way, shape, or form how horrible Gaza is or what our military presence does to Palestinians in the West Bank, but we could describe this in a way that Jews are going to hear. It seems like that's the way we should be having these conversations. And as you mentioned, you said let's stop trying to say why it's not like the Holocaust and actually care what happens. I agree. The way to stop people from trying to explain how Gaza is different than the Holocaust is to just stop comparing it to the Holocaust and just explain it for what it is: a horrible situation that's unsustainable. There's unsustainable, and we all have a moral obligation to do something about it.
I would amend that horrible. I don't like it when anyone describes a situation where there's a clear perpetrator, and I'm not just talking about Israel-Palestine. I don't like describing it as a tragedy. If you go back to the Greek conception of a tragedy, it's something that the protagonist had no control over. We have control over. It's not a tragedy, it's a criminality. There's a perpetrator committing a crime, consciously, willfully, deliberately committing a crime. When Israeli snipers along the border with Gaza, they shoot at unarmed paraplegics in wheelchairs, that's not shoot to kill them, or shoot to maim them at the knee to give them a life-enduring injury. That's not a tragedy. That's a criminal action. Whenever the scenes of the Vietnam War came up, my mother would go like this. She was not a drama queen. She was literally, viscerally, constitutionally, physically incapable of looking at scenes of war. She would go like this. She would say, "Tell me when it's over. Tell me when it's over." And she would always compare it to the Nazi Holocaust, what the U.S. was doing in Vietnam. By the way, the numbers aren't so far off. The U.S. killed about 3 to 4 million Vietnamese during the war. So she'd say, "Tell me when it's over." So I inherited that. You want me to crawl out of my skin? You want me to be something I'm not? That's how my parents looked at the world, and that's how I came to look at the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to make any apologies for it. However, I do agree at this moment in time, because as I said, the moral authority of the struggle of the situation of the Palestinians, it's been established. It's unnecessary to drag in the Nazi Holocaust.
You said let's stop trying to say why it's not like the Holocaust and actually care what happens. I agree. The way to stop people from trying to explain how Gaza is different than the Holocaust is to just stop comparing it to the Holocaust and just explain it for what it is: a horrible situation that's unsustainable. There's unsustainable, and we all have a moral obligation to do something about it.
I would amend that horrible. I don't like it when anyone describes a situation where there's a clear perpetrator, and I'm not just talking about Israel-Palestine. I don't like describing it as a tragedy. If you go back to the Greek conception of a tragedy, it's something that the protagonist had no control over. We have control over. It's not a tragedy, it's a criminality. There's a perpetrator committing a crime, consciously, willfully, deliberately committing a crime. When Israeli snipers along the border with Gaza, they shoot at unarmed paraplegics in wheelchairs, that's not kill them, shoot to kill them, or shoot to maim them at the knee to give them a life enduring injury. That's not a tragedy. That's a criminal action. So with that, with those sort of linguistic nuances, though for me it is a significant difference, uh, I would not say what the Nazi guards did in the concentration camps. I would not call it tragic. I would call it criminal. So I have to use the same moral standard across the board. I would also add, just on a personal note, I can't, I can't, nor do I want to climb out of my skin. If I make the comparisons, if I made those comparisons, it's because my parents made those comparisons. You have an Amira Haas there. You have a few organizations uh, which are doing
Well,
work. You're talking about a bedroom of people. They don't. You can't talk to them. They have a very good life. They have a very good life, a high standard of living. Even the COVID was, at least for the Jewish Israelis, it was very efficiently, the vaccine was efficiently distributed. They have a very good life. You can't talk to them.
so
They have no interest.
I,
At this
I,
point, one has to talk to those who potentially can be won over. And I don't believe that includes for sure American Jews of your generation, American Jews 30 years and under. They have no they don't have that brainwashing when it comes to Israel anymore. That's over. Actually, that was the only good thing that one of the only good things that came of Trump, that the Trump Netanyahu bromance revealed a side of Israel that kind of shocked a lot of American Jews.